Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Saturday lecture. Thank you for joining us today. I'm delighted to extend warm welcome on behalf of the Social Science Lab, non-profit initiative tactic for fostering research, training, and networking among social science research in the Middle East and North Africa region. Our mission is deeply rooted in supporting the growth of knowledge and understanding of social issues, particularly in the context of MENA region. Our commitment to education without borders is reflected through our affiliation with the Fatima Al-Fihri Open University, a beacon of quality education for individuals worldwide, especially those hailing from developing nations. We firmly believe that education knows no boundaries and should be accessible to all, irrespective of their background or location. Today marks another installment of our same Saturday lecture, which serves as open access platform designed to enlighten both our students and the general public about pertinent social matters impacting our region. The Saturday lecture debated on 2021, and this year we are thrilled to present the third iteration, backed with insightful dissection and elementing perspective. It's an honor to introduce our distinguished guest speaker for today, Ms. Ena Lucia Mariaca Pacheco, to speak on the topic of research with the survivors of human trafficking and child sexual abuse. Ms. Pacheco is a trauma-informed professional specialized in child sexual abuse, exploitation, and trafficking. She recently worked at International Policy Organization. For autodidact, she has worked with the government of Canada, non-governmental organization, international organization, law enforcement, victims and survivors on research, policy, human rights advocacy, and global project focused on supporting victims and survivors. Ms. Pacheco's research was used to support Canada Bill S-2024 enact and amend the criminal code, trafficking in persons, before the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights. Ena Lucia is also trainer and speaker and has presented her research at international conference, trained frontline professionals, and is published in child abuse and negligent generally special education on boys. Ena Lucia is the global ambassador and co-founder of founder of the U.S. Council on Violence Against Men and Boys. She is also COO, Chief Operation Officer of CYBER, and Watch provide intelligence consulting. Company without further ado, I extend my gratitude to Ms. Pacheco for gracing us with her presence today. Ms. Pacheco, the fertile medium is yours.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. So, dear fellow researchers, students, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by thanking the Social Science Lab and Fatima Al-Fihri Open University for the opportunity to share my research with you today. And thank you to Ahmed Kuvan that has worked so hard to put this webinar together. Thank you. My name is Ena Lucia Mariaca Pacheco, and I am a trauma-informed, survivor-informed human security expert. And for the last 13 years, I've worked in different agencies around the world towards a common goal of raising awareness and stopping human trafficking. I've worked at the Government of Canada helping redefine the criminal code on human trafficking, then working with victims of trafficking in Southeast Asia. And now I find myself working on research, global projects, and raising awareness on these important topics. I know it can be scary as students starting off in your studies or young professionals beginning in your career, but I'm here not only to teach you about an important topic, but also encourage you in your journeys within the academic world. So we are going to start off with a few activities to get everyone ready for this lecture. So in the chat box, can you please write what country you are listening from? So I'll wait for some answers and then read them out loud. So I'm coming from France. Oh, there's another one from France. We have someone in Singapore. We have someone from Nigeria. Fantastic. Someone from Tunisia. Very good. And let's see, is there someone else that wants to write something? That's great. Very good. We have so many people here today. So also in the chat, write what you're studying or what do you want to study? What are your interests in? Let's see. So put those in the chat and I'll read them out loud as well. Social and educational public policy. That is fantastic. Very, very good. Conflict resolution, cultural studies. Great job, everyone. These are looking great. Okay, so we are going to go on to our next slide. So you don't have to write this in the chat box, but maybe write it down on a piece of paper and a pen. If you don't have those, you can quickly go get them. But this is our next activity. On a piece of paper, write down, when you think of human trafficking, what do you think of? Who can be a victim and who can be a perpetrator? So I'll give you about 2 minutes to put that together, and then we'll go on to the rest of our presentation. Oh, great. We have another person that is in human anatomy in the university in their bachelor's and would love to do a master's in public health. That is really, really good. Fantastic. So again, the questions are, when you think of human trafficking, what do you think of? Who can be a victim and who can be a perpetrator? So really start thinking about these things and we'll go into it in the next 30 seconds. So remember, don't put it in the chat box yet. We're going to be doing that later on. Great job. Okay, next slide. So human trafficking is the second highest income generating crime in the world. It is estimated that 2 children are sold every minute. And according to the Global Slavery Index, there are over 50 million people in modern day slavery today. So imagine Canada's total population is 38 million. So imagine the entire population in slavery in a whole, and then even more people. Human trafficking can take many forms, but it's always involving exploitation of another person. Traffickers may use violence, threats, coercion to control their victims. They may deceive their victims to believing they have offered a legitimate job or an opportunity. But human trafficking is a serious crime and has grave violations of human rights. The United Nations provides a comprehensive definition of human trafficking called the Protocol of Prevention, Suppress, and Punish Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children, which is part of the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. and this is commonly known as Palermo Protocol. The Palermo Protocol defines human trafficking as the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, and receipt of persons by means of threat or use of force or other forms of coercion or deception, or the giving or receiving of payment or benefit to achieve the consent of a person having of another person for the purpose of exploitation. And this exploitation shall include the minimum of the exploitation of prostitution for others, other forms of slavery, sexual exploitation, forced labor of services, slavery, or other similar practices to slavery, servitude, or even removal of organs. In summary, human trafficking involves these key elements as you see here. Acts or action. It includes various forms of action such as recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or the receipt of an individual. Number 2 is means. Human trafficking can involve the use of force, fraud, coercion, deception, and giving or receiving of payments. And this is the benefit of gain control over the other person. And the last thing, purpose. The ultimate purpose, exploitation, which can encompass various forms as we've spoken about. So some forms of human trafficking in the Middle East and North Africa, but again, this is all over the world, is forced labor, which is people who are forced to work, for example, in construction, bricklaying, camel jockeying, agriculture, factories, or domestic service. Another is sex trafficking, and this includes people who are forced to engage in prostitution or other commercial sex acts. Child trafficking, which includes children who are trafficked for forced labor, like we said before, sex trafficking, or organ trafficking. And organ trafficking includes people who are forced to donate or have their organs stolen or tissues, and then often either they get the financial gain or someone else does. But many of these times, those individuals end up dying because of this form of trafficking. Begging includes people who are forced to beg on the streets, and forced marriages. So you can see some of those examples here on that slide. So trafficking often targets vulnerable populations such as refugees, migrants, and other people living in poverty. They may also target people who are looking for job opportunities or looking to migrate to a different country. But they can also target anyone, but even people with money. There is no prejudice here. Once a person is trafficked, they are often forced to work long hours in dangerous and exploitative conditions. They might be denied food, water, medical care. They might also be subject to physical and sexual abuse. Human trafficking is a serious crime that violates human rights, and it's also a public and safety threat. Traffickers often operationalize in criminal networks that involve using other crimes. So this can also involve drug trafficking, people smuggling, arms trafficking, weapons. And there are a number of factors that contribute to human trafficking. For example, in the MENA region, conflicts and instability can create conditions that make people more vulnerable to trafficking. For example, people who are displaced by conflict may be more likely to be trafficked or forced into labor or sex trafficking. For example, in the wars that are happening today, when adults and children are running away to the borders, they can easily fall into these traps of human traffickers when they are promised to be helped. And poverty is another major risk to be trafficked. People who are living in poverty may be more likely to accept these dangerous and exploitative job offers in order to survive, not knowing what will happen later. Also, there's a lack of awareness. Many people around the world and in the MENA region are not aware of the dangers of human trafficking, and this makes them more vulnerable to being trafficked. So what got me in this field in the first place? Why human trafficking and child abuse? So when I was almost 16 years old, I first learned about human trafficking, and a short video clip by NGO Love 146, it showed a little girl with a little paper taped to her chest with the number 146. And there were buyers. also known as child sexual abusers, holding menus with the amount of cost of each child. Children were around the room looking sad and destroyed, but it was this little girl in her eyes, and she showed that she wouldn't give up. She looked right into the perpetrators and said, "I'm not going to give up." And this little video clip is what changed my life forever. It started this lifelong journey to help those that have been hurt by human trafficking for sexual exploitation, to fulfill this deeper desire to become a voice for those that had been silenced. This journey brought me to a small village in the world housing hundreds of orphans behind these closed gates. And it was these hidden communities filled with children that I had spent years learning about, but I wanted to keep learning more. And this put a fire in my heart, and I felt like I had this purpose in my life. At age 19, I worked as a volunteer for a member of parliament in the Canadian government. And I created and developed a human trafficking case tracker to understand the patterns of victims and criminals and prosecution sentencing. And this work supported laws such as Bill C-310, which finally made it illegal and punishable for Canadians to commit these crimes across the world outside of Canada's borders. And just remember, this was less than 10 years ago. This still is a very new topic around the world. And at age 21, I witnessed firsthand human trafficking during a humanitarian aid mission to Cambodia. Our team identified several karaoke bars in Phnom Penh, which openly sold services with children. These small menus were written with black marker, listing different forms of abuse and exploitation of children for the sale of only a few dollars. The kids sat closely together on these dirty couches, each with their shirts marked with a number to help customers pick their preferred victims. And these were just children, scared and totally unprotected from these monsters, just a few seats down. So this was no longer those news articles that I was analyzing back in Canada. These were real children, just an arm's length away. And these children were right there, right in front of my eyes. And human trafficking for sexual exploitation is not fixed to one country or one region. This is global. It is in Canada, and it is in the MENA region. These crimes are not like what we typically imagine or what we've seen on TV. It is rarely a white van where a man is offering candy and kidnaps a child, and it's not just a girl that's in chains. Child sexual exploitation and abuse is so integrated within our societies that anyone, regardless of gender or status, can be a perpetrator, from parents to school teachers, sports coaches, doctors, and community leaders. In my research, I found that these perpetrators were not only men, but also women. And it can be anyone. It could be father, mother, the grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins, someone close to the family, a family friend. So it is not always a stranger. And a child can still be abused and exploited at the end of the day and go to their beds and to school the next day. From my hometown in Ottawa, Canada, to the Middle East, to Africa, human trafficking and child sexual exploitation is everywhere. And is very important for us researchers to uncover these very real crimes and issues that these bring. So shortly after being accepted to my university program for my master's at Royal Roads University, I interned at an international police organization. And so while working on these projects on protecting children, I read one of their research reports, the one you could see here on the screen, which stated that boys of all ages, infants and toddlers, were at the greatest risk of severe online sexual abuse and live stream assault and torture. So this broke my heart, and I knew I wanted to keep fighting to protect these children. And this now expanded to filling the gap of knowledge, which were male victims. Male survivors of human trafficking and exploitation are often marginalized by society. They face stigma, and their trauma and experiences are forgotten or ignored. And this was unacceptable to me. A child that experiences trauma needs to be recognized regardless of their gender. And these little boys' voices mattered to me. It was not fair to only help girls. What about those babies? What about those little boys? We also need to remember them too. And the research I did exposed perpetrators. And the biggest surprise to me was the amount of female perpetrators, more specifically the mothers. In over 50% of all my cases, survivors had female abusers as their sexual abusers, as their traffickers, and as their buyers of this child sexual abuse. At Royal Roads University, my university, students were encouraged to include marginalized voices, to stand for what is right, and to pursue a degree with impact. As part of my master's thesis, I conducted interviews with 40 men who survived being trafficked and sexually abused as children, and learned about their experiences, what could have been done to help them. As a result, many survivors disclose that just the process of being interviewed and actively listened to was enough for them to start feeling some healing. And it was encouraging some to seek further support. One survivor in the research said, as we can see here on the screen, "Finally, someone sees us. You've heard us. You've heard our cries, our pain." And the idea of including survivor voices led this research into a deeper impact that I could have never imagined. It encouraged male survivors to tell their stories, even some for the very first time. By creating these safe spaces, believing survivors, and being kind, it allowed for change. And hopefully for some survivors to no longer be enclosed in that cage that was their body, but freedom to finally use their voice and ask for support. So let's go back to the chat. How can we be impactful in our work and in academics? So please put your answers in the chat box. Let's see what you come up with. So again, the question is, how can we be impactful with our work in academics? Let's see some typing. How can we be impactful in our work and in academics? If researching vulnerable populations, to consider more patient-centered approaches. Very good. By making people a better society that focuses of our research. Great job. By actively listening. Very good. I really like the participant-centered approaches. This could also be seen as victim-centered approaches, survivor-centric approaches, depending on who is your vulnerable population. Those are very good answers. So let's just wait for a few more people. Let's see. Great job, everyone. Very good. To try to let others know more about victims, a close collaboration between researchers and policymakers and policy implementers. That's a very good answer. Yeah, you really do need to really engage your government, engage those members of Parliament or Congress, because they're the ones that represent you and represent, the wants of the country as well. Joining bodies and lending our voices and fighting against trafficking. That's a great answer too. Good job, everyone. These are great. Very good. So let's see let's continue to see this. So being impactful in academics and research. So we want to set clear goals. To be impactful, start by defining your academic and research goals. What do you want to achieve? Clearly articulate objectives, and that will guide your efforts and help you stay focused. Stay curious, maintaining a genuine curiosity in your field. Ask questions, challenge assumptions, and seek to understand the nuances of the subject that you're studying. This intellectual curiosity can lead to groundbreaking discoveries. For example, with my research, I was looking at those gaps. What are we missing? What is no one looking into? Ethical conduct. Ensure your research is conducted with the utmost ethical standards. For my research, it took 2 years to get ethical approval because I was working with those vulnerable populations, but it was so important to go through all those steps properly so that I made sure that the people I was engaging with, that they had all the safety requirements and everything to make sure that it was going to be done in an ethical way. So respect your participants' integrity of the data collection and analysis. Transparency in reporting the findings are fundamental. Ethical research contributions to a trustworthy academic environment are very important. And collaboration. Collaborate with your peers and mentors. Share ideas and resources that can lead to innovation and breakthroughs. Be a supportive collaborator, offering constructive feedback and recognizing the contributions of your team members. So remember, if you have someone on your team that's doing great work, highlight their work. This is not always a competition. You can work collaboratively, and this makes you both stronger at the end. Mentorship. As you progress in your academic journey, become a mentor to others, guiding and supporting fellow researchers and students. It's an act of kindness that can have lasting impacts on their career. For example, I had many mentors throughout my life, even today, and they provide me with knowledge and wisdom and help you avoid mistakes that they've already made. So we should learn from them so you don't make the same mistake. And I also have mentored many students. So it's about sharing what you have learned with others. And be generous in sharing your knowledge. Participate in conferences, seminars, workshops, and present your research. Engaging with the public through accessible writing, talks, social media, or like this webinar to disseminate your findings. Also, don't forget to cite and acknowledge. Always give credit where it's due. Cite your work that has influenced your research and acknowledge those have contributed to your fields. This promotes a culture of respect and collaboration, but it also encourages more collaboration. One person does not know everything, and it would be impossible to think that you do or that they do. So by acting like you're the best, you're actually missing out on great opportunities to grow and to learn. When I speak at global conferences, I always like to bring someone with me or via video. I highlight their great work because when I do my research and it supports what others do in the field, and what they do makes my work stronger. So it is a circle. And if we say, wow, great job to others, it creates a better space for all of us. Remember also to be kind and to have empathy. Kindness is not just about being polite. It's about understanding and empathizing with the challenges the other people's face. Be supportive of your colleagues, your students, and your peers, encouraging a culture of mental well-being in academia. It is our generation that talking about mental health is so important. And in research, and in my research, I had to go to a therapist and talk every single week. I was taking in so much secondary PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. And this means that whenever a survivor was telling me, I felt it. Their nightmares were my nightmares, their pain were my pain, and I physically felt it. So it was very important for me to take care of myself. And thinking about this, let's just say you see someone get hit by a car. You would never say, oh, just stand up, you're okay. You would say, oh no, are you okay? Let's take you to a hospital. They might have a broken bone and you can't expect them to heal in one day. It takes time. And this is the same as trauma on the body and the brain. It takes time to heal the heart and the mind. Trauma can come out in emotions or physical symptoms, and trauma can lead to real pain, real hurt, or even things like cancer. So it's a very big deal, and this needs attention and to be looked at. So make sure you take care of yourself during the research process as well as others. So trauma-informed ethical research with vulnerable populations. So doing this with vulnerable populations is very important to ensure that the research process is respectful, safe, and empowering for the survivors or the participants. Vulnerable groups such as survivors of trauma, refugees, or marginalized groups often face unique challenges that require sensitivity and ethical approaches. Trauma-informed research recognizes the impact of trauma on individual communities, and it creates a safe space and empowering environment for participants to acknowledge that trauma may affect their response and well-being. So let's go back to the start. How did I start all of this, and how could you start all of this? Establishing informed consent. Informed consent is foundational for ethical research. In the context of trauma-informed, victim-centric, or person-centric research, it is crucial to explain the research purposes and potential triggers. Participants must feel fully informed and to be given the option to withdraw at any time. Always think about this. If I were to participate, how would I want to be treated? What would I want to know? So never lie and never trick anyone. Recruitment and sampling. Carefully consider the recruitment method is very essential. Vulnerable populations might require outreach through trusted community organizations or individuals. Random sampling might not always be appropriate. Instead, look at purposive or snowballing sampling that could be more effective. So it took me a year to know to the community that I was a safe person in the male survivor community. And this was already after years of working with female survivors. So it is very important to not skip this step. How would you like it if a stranger just came up to you and started asking you questions? What would you think? Who are you? What do you want? But if you take your time and show your research ideas, your questions, why you're doing this, then the community can really decide if they want to open up to you. So create safe spaces. Design research environments that are physically and emotionally safe. And this could include providing a private, comfortable, neutral location for your interviews. It could also be online over Zoom, and allowing participants to have the support items that they need. So I did this within my research. For example, I did this over Zoom, like we're doing today. So I said, get your favorite snack, get some water, tissues to cry, maybe a pillow to hold. And so remember, this was even for adult men. They needed that space to feel safe to open up because they were sharing very hard stories. And I listened, and I really listened to them. I took my time with them. I let them cry, and sometimes I even cried with them. I shared the emotions and the pain and let them know, yeah, that was horrible, and I'm so sorry you went through this. Remember, at the end of the day, the people that we're talking to, they're people too. They're not just numbers. My methodology was not the traditional manner. And it was not just clinically like 1 hour and a few questions, which is what normally is done. But this lasted over 1 year, really developing that relationship with the participants and letting them know that I was a safe person. So next, trauma-informed training. Before I started any of my work, I always continued learning. I took as many courses as possible, and I learned what I could to really understand what does it mean to be trauma-informed. And you can do this online or even on YouTube. Researchers should receive training on trauma-informed practices, understanding the impacts of trauma, recognizing the signs of distress, and knowing how to respond appropriately, which is crucial. Ensuring that participation is voluntary and that there's no negative consequences for non-participation. In these vulnerable populations, there's always this power dynamic that makes it very difficult for that person to say no. So just really allow them that space and that breathing room to go, you know what, I'm actually not comfortable with it, and say, that is totally okay. I respect you, and nothing negative will come if you say no, or even if you do the entire process before the data is mixed up and they say, I'm sorry at that point, and they pull out. Even if you spent so much time, that has to be respected, and they have to be have that safe space to go, okay, I can go. So use sensitive language. Researchers should use non-judgmental and non-triggering language, avoid leading questions, and be prepared for participants to share traumatic experiences. Respect cultural sensitivity, be aware of cultural differences, and respect the diverse worldviews and belief systems within their population that you're studying, and tailor your approaches accordingly. The data collection methods, so really make sure you choose the right data methods that prioritizes participant comfort and safety. For example, conducting interviews rather than writing surveys might be more appropriate for your population if they have low literacy levels. And those that experience trauma, or like I did, I had actually a few options. For those that couldn't speak, they were writing, and for those that couldn't write, they spoke and I typed. So when analyzing the data, be mindful of the potential emotional impacts on yourself and on those people. Consider debriefing and supporting with your research team. Like what I had said before, I had help throughout the entire research time, and it really helped limit the amount of trauma that I was taking in. So make sure to mitigate as much risk as possible. So safeguarding the identity and information of these participants. Use nicknames or take extra precautions when storing and sharing the data. So in my published work, all the survivors got to choose their names. And in their trafficking, their names were actually taken away and replaced by a number sometimes. So this way, it really helped them heal by having the autonomy to choose their names and what they wanted to be called in my research. So in conclusion, being impactful in academics and research is not about just academic achievements, but also about making positive and ethical contributions in your field and society. By setting these clear goals, maintaining high ethical standards, and collaborating, mentoring, practicing kindness, you can navigate through the academic world successfully while leaving a lasting positive impact. Your work should not only advance the knowledge, but also promote a culture of respect and empathy within academia, which in turn will benefit all who engage with your work. So I want to encourage you to use your academic journey to create an impact and to make sure you use marginalized voices in a trauma-informed, victim-centric way. Make sure if you talk to women, men, boys, or girls, let them have a voice in the decision-making process of any project you do in the future. Listen to their stories and be an ally for those that do not have a voice yet. Being silent is powerless, but real impact comes from having a voice. Your voice is powerful. It can help redefine the values of our system set in society and make change for the better. So thank you for listening, and now it's time for our next activity. So let's go to that chat box, or people can also speak as well. So now, when you think of human trafficking, what do you think of? So let's start with that first question. Number one, when you think of human trafficking, what do you think of? So you can write it in the chat if you want, or you can say it out loud. So I'll wait a little bit for some answers to be typed up. So start thinking. When you think of human trafficking, what do you think of? You can use the answers that you wrote down on that piece of paper. Okay, so when you think of human trafficking, what do you think of? Men trying to attack children or women, okay. Forced migration, transportation of people, exploitation. Good answers, very good. Let's see if we have a little bit more. So what do you think of after what you learned today? Let's see. Great, these are good. Okay, so let's go to question number 2. Who can be a victim? Who can be a victim? Oh, we have another answer from the question before. When I think of human trafficking, I think of sexual and labor exploitation. Very good. Yeah, so like we said, for answer number 1, these are great answers. There are many different forms of human trafficking. The ones that we mainly think of are the ones that were mentioned today. countries under war that have deep dependent economic or developed countries. Very good. Okay, answer for number 2. Anyone, male or female, can be a victim. Another one is children and women. Very good. Okay. Children and women mainly. Anyone can be a victim, especially those who are socially disadvantaged. These are great answers. So just a reminder, like some of us had said in the chat, anyone, male or female, can be a victim. This can be babies, infants, toddlers, teenagers, young adults, even older adults. In my research, I had male survivors that were victims all throughout their lives. Remember, they were children and they were even re-victimized as adults or even elderly. So we have to really think of that. When we think of these victimhoods, we can't have those gender biases or those social blinders. Yeah. So in a lot of our statistics, we really think of females or girls or women. So we have to remember, why might that be? And so I'm finding in my research that a lot of the time, these boys or men are they're not being counted as victims. They may be counted as criminals, or they might not even be counted at all. Or when they do disclose that they're being trafficked for labor or for sex or for organs, they might not even be believed. So it's really important for us when we answer number 2 in the future, who can be a victim? Anyone could be a victim, regardless of gender, regardless of age. Very good. Okay, so let's do number 3. Who could be a perpetrator? So who can be a perpetrator? Who's doing these crimes? What do you think? So who can be a perpetrator? So you can write them in the chat. Let's see. I can see some people are typing. Criminal groups and friends and family. Very good answer. Yeah. Great job. Let's see some more answers coming. Men or anyone inhumane and loves money more than human life. Yes, that is very important. A lot of this is financially based or financial gains. Yeah, or those who suffer from mental disorders, that can also be part of it. Any individual or group that needs to have material authority, men or women as individuals or as criminal groups can be perpetrators. Very good answer. Yeah, so just like who can be a victim, anyone, men or women at any age, who can be a perpetrator? Like we saw in the research before, it can be men, it can be women. This is not about gender. If you actually, I have a friend of mine who is part of Cyber Night Watch, and so this is a company that does cyber intelligence gathering, and she saw that in one of the war zones, when those children and women were coming out of those areas, they were being targeted to be trafficked, and the leaders of the trafficking group were women. Very, very interesting. Something that we don't usually think of, to have female leading these type of criminal groups. So we have to really, again, watch that gender bias. Who can be a perpetrator, men or women? Who can be a victim, men or women? So let's go to number 4. What did you find most important about today's lecture? What is something that stuck out to you? So you can put that in the chat box as well. So again, after today's lecture, what stuck out to you? What do you find most important? What did you take away from this lecture? So let's wait to see a few of their answers. What are you taking away from today? Let's see. Just waiting for a couple answers. I see some people typing. So the question is, what stuck out to you today? What did you find most important, or what are you taking away from this lecture today? Most of these victims yearn for someone to hear them. As your research has shown, that is very important. A lot of people around the world, or I would say everyone around the world, just wants to be listened to, regardless of what experience they've gone through. Most of us have gone through some trauma in our lives. It doesn't have to be trafficking or exploitation or sexual abuse. We still want to be heard. So we have to remember that when speaking to these vulnerable people or listening to them, they just want to be listened to and they just want to be believed. That's a very great answer. Another one is the importance of consent and protection of their identities. Very true. A lot of people will not speak to you if you say that their identities are going to be thrown out over there, because imagine those are your hardest and deepest stories. Now, next one, I will be more watchful of my environment and spot perpetrators and victims and raise alarms to the relevant authorities. That's great. That's really, really good. That's actual action that's coming out of this. Thank you so much for doing this. And how we can help the victims. That is very important, actually. So remember, even to answer that, because that could even be a question, how we can help them is to really listen to them. Sometimes they don't want the help right away. Sometimes they just want to have that pain acknowledged. That's that to listen to it. And we don't always have to fix it. What I found really important is just to ask that person is, what would you like me to do right now? How would you feel supported and helped? You don't always have to fix things right away. You can always just let them tell you what they would like. And then you can always progress through different support services, even helping them with the authorities, through their case, depending on what kind of trauma they've gone through. So these are fantastic. Very, very good. And something surprising to me personally, that you found men as victims and women leaders of recruitment groups. That also surprised me too. I actually came into this work as a very strong feminist, and I still am, but seeing this really showed me that there is this societal blinder and a social narrative that women and mothers that were kind and considerate and motherly, always with babies and children, but these females can be very sadistic, very hateful, very bad people, and they hide behind this mask, and a lot of them do not get prosecuted, or even a lot of people say, oh, that can't happen, so they don't believe the survivor. So it's very, very important to always think anyone can be a victim and anyone can be a perpetrator regardless of their gender. So another one, thinking of sociologists and professional experts in social and sensitive issues related directly almost to governmental and international securities. Very good. Okay, so let's go to our next slide. And so let's go to our question time. So either please raise your hand or put a question in the chat box. Any question that you might have for me, we'll take the last little bit to have those Q's and A's. So any kind of question you have, please feel free to write it to me. So I'm just waiting for some of those questions. Oh yeah, okay. Go ahead.
I can give the first question for you.
Sure.
Actually, I want to know how we can reduce the victim of this kind of criminal.
Yeah, so so your question is like, how can we prevent this or reduce this? So there's actually a few ways. So if we're looking at like the victims, we really want to look at things like prevention. Let's educate our children on What is sexual abuse early on? What is human trafficking? What is grooming? And grooming are those tactics and those ways that that perpetrators use to kind of manipulate you and get you to a point where they can exploit you. So that's one way for children or for those vulnerable people to learn more about human trafficking or about these vulnerabilities where they can be abused and used and exploited. And in terms of perpetrators, how do we stop them? How do we stop these offenders? That's actually a very hard question that not many people around the world know. But myself and one of my colleagues are actually working on understanding the psychology of different offender profiles. So for example, I have, I'm friends with a researcher named Holly Wood. She lives in Canada at the University of Calgary doing her PhD on how male offenders are doing these crimes and why. So it's really looking at the preventative lens so that hopefully we can put that into the education system to help children not be offended against, and how we can help support offenders before they offend, or what we can do with them afterwards. And I'm actually also looking into the female offender side, looking into their psychology. How can we prevent this? How can we stop those buyers from purchasing these children or these vulnerable people? And so, of course, this is a very large question, and this is definitely a PhD type question, but hopefully I can have a really good answer for you in the next few years after I complete that work. So another question is, what relevant bodies can I join as a volunteer to lend my voice against human trafficking? Can you list some? That is a fantastic question. There actually are so many different agencies around the world. It really depends on what you would like to do. If you would like to kind of be an advocate and raise awareness, if you would like to be on the ground working with victims and survivors. There are many different types around the world. So for example, I'll just give you a couple of them that I know right off the bat. So there is, for example, Love 146. That's actually how I learned about it. And so that's a very good organization. I also, I'm partnered with Brave Education. They're bringing education to young people and telling them kind of how to go through this. And it's a very interesting program. And you can see kind of different things depending on the different types of people that you want to support, either male or female. There's so many organizations around the world for that. So I can always give Ahmed's a list if people are interested, and then they can go through some of that. And if you're actually interested in reading some really good trauma-informed research on trafficking and exploitation of children, there's organizations called ECPAT International. They're very good at producing that type of research. Another one are there cases where the lines between victim and perpetrator are blurred? And how can we approach this? Yes, that's actually what started me in the human security lens, because we were looking at these victims as perpetrators. And it's very interesting because a lot of the time, there's so many different things revolving around it. So a victim, they can be kind of involved as not involved themselves, but in this realm of also drug trafficking, of other human trafficking, of arms trafficking. And so you might have a victim that is forced to help with the recruitment, or themselves are forcibly injected or taking drugs. And let's say law enforcement get them, they test them, they go, okay, you're on drugs, you've helped with recruitment, and they automatically put them in that box of you're a criminal as well. So there are these very blurry lines, especially if that person is into adulthood. For myself, I think children should always be treated as victims because they are very vulnerable. They never agree to this, and it's very, very difficult for them. But that is a very good question, how we can approach this. I think with kindness and empathy, really understanding the story. Sometimes there may actually be fault. Sometimes it's all forced upon them. So it's really understanding why and how, and really listening to that story. And so it's very tailored to every single case. Do you have field work and statistics about victims and perpetrators, because the subject is basically depending on security authorities in every country? And is there any obstacles in your research, and how have you faced them? Yes, so within the field of human trafficking, statistics are actually, they're a little difficult because we have a lot of prevalence statistics and statistics around the country, but we have to remember this is based on the survivors that are counted, or the survivors that are willing to speak about it, or even the survivors that are still alive. So we have to really see statistics as kind of guides to their reality, but not the actual reality of the situation. And it is very specific based on countries, but there are reports. So there's like annual human trafficking reports that kind of tells you which tier every single country is at, what they're doing to help prevent human trafficking, and things like that, which you can actually just find by Googling those exact questions. And were there any obstacles in your research, and how did you face them? That's a very good question. I had so many obstacles that I did have to overcome. One of them was the ethical review. It took 2 years to do, and I really had to keep going back to that ethics board and explaining why this was important, how I would do it, give them all my questions. It took a long time, but having that perseverance and going back really, really helped create this project. So that was an obstacle that had a success behind it. And so what are some support systems available for survivors? That's very, very good. There are some support systems available for survivors within each region or country. There aren't that many for men and boys, unfortunately, which is actually why I love raising awareness for this and partnering with those organizations, because we really need to bring more awareness of this topic globally, regionally, nationally, within our own countries, because we do want to build up those support systems. So the support systems might look like the judicial system, law enforcement, that can also look like safe homes. It can look like counseling, therapist support, or even support systems that could be friends and family. So as individuals, what we can do if we have even just a case of child abuse in our friends and family, it doesn't even have to be trafficking. Remember, the first thing is just listen, believe them, just be there for them. And like I said with the other one, these are really good kind of Google searches for those support systems. So these are great questions. So let me just go to the final slide. So this is my contact information. So if any of you had further questions, would like to follow up, would like some lists of organizations, or even more details on how to support other victims, please feel free to send me an email. You can add me on LinkedIn, and you can see my Linktree website here. This has all my webinars and my thesis and my journal free of charge, so you can have that free access for you at any time. And you can also take your phone and scan the QR code, and it will take you to that Linktree, which will give you access to everything for free. So thank you very much, everyone, for participating in this webinar, and I will hand it back to Ahmed.
Heartfelt thank you to Ms. Pacheco for sharing your experts and insights with us today. Your contribution has enriched our understanding and sparked meaningful discussions. To all our attendees, whether on Zoom or joining us through Facebook Live, thank you for being part of this enlightening journey. We look forward to your continued participation in our future endeavors. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ena Lucia.
You're welcome.
Thank you all.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you all.
Bye.